Mother, do you have a motto or slogan in your life? Yes, to allow people to consume me. A quote by Mother Teresa of Calcutta. On the road. Father Stefano started organizing his first cenacles on a regular basis. He was a priest in the Diocese of Milan, a member of the Company of St. Paul, and he began his work in the city of Milan. In the beginning, he was welcomed by the Jesuits in the church of San Fidel. There was Mass, Eucharistic adoration, rosary, confessions, catechesis, but he soon became an unwelcome guest. There was too much devotion, so he had to pack up and leave. Then he was welcomed by his friend, Father Giulio Giacometti, rector of the Basilica of San Nazaro, who gave him the freedom to do whatever he wanted. Cardinal Giovanni Colombo, from 1902 to 1992, was the Archbishop of Milan. He summoned Father Giulio to ask him for further information about Father Gobbi, since all the hustle and bustle had raised some concern. He wanted an explanation. Father Giulio explained what he observed, that Father Gobbi was a priest who prayed and made others pray. These are the exact words of Father Giulio. I was hearing confessions when I heard the sound of footsteps. It was Cardinal Colombo. The true reason for his visit was to ask me a favor. Would you be willing to take in Father Stefano Gobbi at your spirituality center? It will be only for a little while because the bishops, and especially the Bishop of Piacenza, don't want to have him come into their diocese, since his purpose is to gather priests together into a Marian group. However, I also want to know your opinion before we ask him to stop. You ought to know, just in case this may be useful to you, that he used to be active with his group in the Church of San Fidel, but the Jesuits didn't want him anymore. It so happened that after the 10th of November, as I do every year, I went to the town of Rho, near Milan, to attend the holy spiritual exercises. To my great surprise, I discovered that the cardinal was also there participating. After lunch, while I was going up to my room to take a rest, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned around and saw the cardinal. He whispered to me and asked me, "What do you think of Father Gobbi?" I was waiting for your reply. "What do you think of him?" I answered him, "Your Eminence, I found him very obedient. His group is growing continuously. I have asked him to put in writing the locations he receives, explaining the manner and the message without altering the expressions or the meaning at all." The cardinal added, "If you say so, I trust you. Keep in mind that as soon as they enter the threshold of the basilica, you are the one who must answer to the archbishop." When we reached the door of his apartment, he said goodbye to me with these words, "Always pray for your archbishop." Over time, Father Stefano's life changed, and he devoted himself entirely to the movement, making trips throughout Italy and the world. The Company of St. Paul allowed him this freedom. He started traveling outside the country to the 5 continents with increasing frequency. All his trips were counted. In the first 20 years, 1972 to 1992, he went on 900 air flights, traveling from Europe to America and from Africa to Asia and as far as Oceania. Addressing the Virgin Mary in one of his last circular letters on January 1st, 2011, he wrote, "I have accomplished this mission of yours in these years, having taken 1,500 flights and making many other trips by car and by train. I have been to the 5 continents many times to lead my brother priests to make the consecration to your Immaculate Heart. Some of them are already in heaven, and many others are still on this earth." End quote. During his active years with the movement, his yearly calendar of events was organized on a more or less fixed schedule. Father Gabriele explained, "At the end of June, there were the spiritual exercises. Afterwards, he would go back to Milan and stay with his various assistants for a few days. Then he would go to be with a family from Veneto for another couple of days. Subsequently, he would leave again for San Amaro at Father Luigi's and stay there until the first Saturday of August for the Cynical. From there, he would go to visit his family in Dongo for about 15 days, where he would prepare himself to face his various upcoming trips. After the Cynical in Milan on the first Sunday of September, he would go to various countries until November. When he came back, he would remain in Italy until after Christmas. After Epiphany, he would organize his trip to Latin America and would stay overseas until Easter. After Easter, he would tour all of Italy to do Cynicals, and he always would conclude with the one in Loreto in June. He would then return to Milan to prepare the spiritual exercises, but before leaving for them on the Saturday before his departure, he would first go to the shrine of Slovenia. There was no time to rest. Father Stefano's life was always on the go, but even he himself obviously felt the need to stop once in a while and catch his breath. One of the places which was dear to him and where he liked to rest was Rubio in the province of Vicenza, with Father Gino Samasso, the pastor of the church there. In this small mountain village, in silence, surrounded by nature, and in prayer, he spent moments of spiritual rest, and here he also received several locutions from Our Lady. She used to encourage him and assure him of her presence as mother. Another place of refuge was Udine, as the guest of Father Adrino Menozzi, with whom he would often go to the shrine of Madonna di Casamonte. He took the opportunity to stay with the priest of the area in an informal and friendly way, and this place also seemed to be especially dear to the Queen of Heaven. In her message of February 14, 1985, she said, "My beloved children, I have wanted you here today, on a brilliant day, with a blue sky, a warm sun, and the snow which gives a tone of purity to the high mountains, which form a crown for this place, from which rises the blessed house of your Heavenly Mother. I enfold you with my motherly rays." End quote. People in his own hometown were always waiting for him, especially his mother at the house where he grew up. Today in Dongo, on Via Campidi, number 6, there is Father Stefano's room, exactly the same as it was back then, with a bed, a small wardrobe, and a dresser. On the wall, a picture of the Virgin Mary stands out. On the other side, there is an oriental statue of Our Lady, a memento from one of his many journeys. On the other side of the bedroom, there is a balcony where he used to sit with his mother to talk and pray during the days he spent with her in Dongo. The people from Dongo saw them talk affectionately. This son not only told his mother about his adventures around the world, but he also probably shared his difficult moments with her. She would listen to him with motherly love, give him advice, and then pray Holy Rosary with him. These visits were also an opportunity to spend time with his brothers and sisters, and his sisters were always willing to prepare him a good Italian meal. As always, there was the minor differences of opinion he had with his twin brother, Giuseppe. Even now, his sister-in-law still remembers how at the table the two of them used to badger back and forth, exchanging divergent views and always ending up making up with each other. They could have been arguing over a soccer match. Father Stefano never hid the fact that he was a fan of Milan, or over events from the past. Father Stefano was at home, and here he could speak freely and be himself. Besides, everybody already knew about his fiery and impulsive nature. His days in Dongo were naturally filled with meditation. When he wasn't traveling, he could enjoy some relaxing moments. He would also take the opportunity to devote himself more to personal prayer. In Dongo, he preferred celebrating Holy Mass at the Shrine of Our Lady of Tears, where he would ask if he could celebrate Mass at the altar of Our Lady at times different than those of the scheduled Mass. The friars who knew Father Stefano would give him the permission although there were some complaints because he insisted on celebrating Mass at the old altar facing the image of the Virgin with his back turned to the people. He really enjoyed taking walks in the green fields and on the high mountains which surrounded his native town. Along with Alberto Capi, or other friends of the town, he used to set off on different paths, reciting the Holy Rosary and talking about this or that. He was enchanted by the beauty of nature and marveled at it. After so many years of seeing this landscape over and over again, he was still in awe, and he would call his friends over to contemplate its beauty. When he walked along the mountain paths, even in his old age, he liked to go to the grotto of his childhood, which he could do only if assisted by his friends. After his mother died, he would go to his old house only during the day. He would sleep in his brother's house and have lunch at his sister Lodia's house. His sister-in-law was delighted to let him stay at her house, and with the reservation typically of the people from the Lake Como area, perhaps afraid she might reveal something too precious, confided, "One night I got up and my eyes just happened to fall upon Father Stefano's room. From the crack in the door I noticed a great light. I noticed right away that it didn't come from a lamp. I don't know what it was. In the morning I didn't ask him anything. I never wanted to pry. Nevertheless, it was something special." When he was taking his days off, he never refused to meet people who came to see him, even though he tried to keep somewhat out of sight. He was both known and unknown. Once a big car with a foreign license plate arrived in Dongo. Some distinguished people got out and asked for Father Stefano Gobbi. They asked some locals where he lived, but they said they didn't know. The foreigners were surprised, and looking at them rather hesitantly, they said, "What do you mean you have a priest who is famous all over the world, and you local folks don't know who he is?" If they had asked where the twins' brother lived, some probably would have shown them the way to his house. A friend from Abruzzo, Father Stefano spent other moments of relaxation with Father Luigi Consorti, a brother priest of the movement from San Omero, a beautiful small town in the province of Teramo in the Abruzzo region. Father Luigi was a very good friend of the movement's founder. The two of them were close and were united by a spirit of mutual understanding and childlike spirituality. The first few times Father Stefano came to visit, Father Luigi would let him use his own room, so they would have a mini moving day, an activity that was called the Sabato Santo, Holy Saturday, in those parts of the Abruzzo. After that, they decided to prepare a guest room to be available for guests all the time. As soon as Father Stefano let them know he was coming, a few of the women from the movement immediately would go to work. They would freshen up the room, sweep it, and then prepare meals. They often helped by working in shifts. Some came in the morning, others at noon, and others in the evening. Our Lady had told Father Stefano many times that he didn't have to worry about anything because she would provide for him, and she kept her promise. She had made herself present in the people who accompanied him and who so lovingly took care of him like a son or like a brother would do. In Santa Amarero, the two priests used to get up very early, around 5:30 in the morning. Their day consisted of the following: the Mass, the complete liturgy of the hours, Eucharistic adoration, and recitation of all the decades of the Rosary. In between, they would go on walks in the woods and have brief conversations with the people they met. If they met other priests, they would sometimes carry on talking for a good while. The meek Father Luigi supported the fiery Father Stefano in everything. The two priests always wore their cassocks, even when it was very hot. Together they used to climb up one of the slopes of the Gran Sasso mountain in the Apennines to the very top. Father Stefano had the idea to erect a large wooden cross there. He said he was inspired by the Blessed Virgin. They had to apply for a permit from the town council and the forestry corps, which was granted to them. They then had a heavy wooden cross sent from France. They erected it at the top of the mountain at night, and Even today, this great Christian sign can still be seen. They put it there in order to call people to prayer. The two priests would go there, praying the rosary with devotion along the way. Father Stefano enjoyed staying at Father Luigi's house. An interior room had a little chapel to the Blessed Sacrament. There he could celebrate Mass without feeling rushed and could remain in prayer as long as he wanted to. Father Luigi remembers this. Father Stefano was demanding about punctuality. At times he would grumble when meals weren't served on time, but then he realized that he had to be a bit more patient. Our time was spent in walks up the mountains, many hours of prayer and conversations about personal matters, and sometimes we would read the newspaper. End quote. One day, a few years before he died, Father Stefano said to Father Luigi, "You know, St. Gabriel of Our Lady of Sorrow, who was born in 1832 in Assisi and died in 1862 in Abruzzo, is a special patron saint of the movement. We can now proclaim it." End quote. This filled his priest friend from Santomero with joy because he was particularly devoted to this saint from his own homeland. Yes, it is true, the saints live with us and always give us a helping hand. The last greeting of the day was directed to the Lord in the little chapel. Then the two would bless each other and say, "Good night." Even in this small town of Abruzzo, there is another person who gave a witness of Father Gobbi similar to the one given in Dongo by his sister-in-law. Miss Piera, who helped Father Luigi with the household chores, tells about the time she passed Father Stefano's bedroom and saw a great light coming from under the door. For reasons of discretion, she never said anything to him about it. During one of his trips to Sicily at the end of the 1970s, the movement's hymn, Immaculate Heart of Mary, was composed, or rather given its final version. This is what happened. In Sicily, there was a woman named Santina Raimondo who used to conduct family Marian gatherings in her town. She would do this even before she became acquainted with the MMP. When she heard about the priest from Milan, Father Stefano Gobbi, she invited him to come and introduce the movement to the people of the island. One day, while reading the words of the hymn, she observed that there were not any words that expressed the relationship between the Mother of God and her priests. Father Stefano accepted her observation and surprisingly replied to the woman, quote, "I want you to write this verse." When she wrote it, it seemed to her that the words, "make them to be just like your son Jesus," were a bit too bold, but Father Stefano gave his full approval. And the next section is named Families. Quote, "I look with love on the families consecrated to me. I am the mother and the queen of families. I watch over their life. I take their problems to heart. I interest myself not only in their spiritual good, but also in their material good of all their members. I immediately look after the children. They become also mine. I share with you your sufferings." End quote. Message of July 23, 1987. Father Stefano loved families, father, mother, and children, according to God's design. He was strict towards modernist and permissive politics. He couldn't tolerate that because of the right to freedom, interpreted as doing whatever one pleases. People went against all moral and traditional values of the Christian life. The family is unique and unreplaceable, just as every individual is unique and unreplaceable. The family must be domestic, quote, domestic church and the basic cell of society, end quote, as St. Pope John Paul has pointed out. It possesses a unique individuality such that it finds its first fundamental confirmation and strength when the family comes together to pray the Our Father. After the law on divorce in 1974, the Italian government approved the law on abortion in 1981. These two wounds have destroyed the institution of the family. Shortly before the law on abortion, Father Stefano expressed himself in the following way, quote, "I will not be here on that day because I will be in Africa for the Syndicals, but Italy will vote in favor of abortion, and whoever wants this law to be passed will win. However, Italy will have a great responsibility before God for these choices, and its punishment will be very severe." In her message of February 27, 1992, Our Lady said, quote, "I share with you the preoccupations and the sufferings of my heart in the face of the painful situation in which the countries here and my church find themselves. Peace is threatened by violence which is spreading. There is spreading more and more those evils which threaten the moral integrity of the people, such as impurity, pornography, drugs, divorce, the recourse to all the means of birth control, and these accursed abortions which cry for vengeance in the sight of God." End quote. This is the reason why he cared about having a personal relationship with Catholic families. When he was a guest in their home, he ended up preaching with his presence without ever meaning to do so. He used to spend time with families to share their moments of everyday life, such as meals, conversations, and prayers. He was like a child. A member of the movement remembers, quote, "I mentioned this to my wife too. If the television was turned on and there was an advertisement or a sports event, he would start to laugh and joke about the images. Then suddenly, becoming tired, he would leave." End quote. He always carried with him a statue of Our Lady. The day should not and could not end without the recitation of the Rosary. In fact, he used to say that only she could sort everything out, even when there might have been a few strong words between a husband and wife, since, quote, "between one Hail Mary and the next, the family is talking to Mary, and she brings back peace," end quote. He had a way with children. When he came home, worn out from the Syndicals, he still found the energy to spend time with them, listening to their big and small problems. They used to seek out his company, and he would let himself be sought out. Father Stefano wanted and sought to form families of prayers, families in which parents set a good example for their children by coming together to pray the Rosary, just as in the days of old. Being a family consecrated to Mary meant living everything the way it had been lived in Nazareth, by putting God first. This meant God was to be in their upbringing, teaching them respect and prayer. This explains the spiritual richness of the families, which became transformed into little family Syndicals. Wherever he went, Father Stefano prayed and made other people pray. The transmission of the values of faith always bears fruit. In our times, we too often judge young people negatively. However, if they haven't been brought up in the faith by their family, how can they be blamed? When a family is peacefully able to be what it is called to be according to God's design, then it becomes a well-formed school where the young can seriously look for and come to know God. For this reason, we have seen that the children of families from the movement who continued to pray the Rosary, when they grew up, learned it at home as children. We mentioned how Father Stefano could connect with small children in their homes. At the Syndicals, he never failed to bless pregnant mothers and the small children who would curiously come up to him in the midst of that holy commotion. As times went on, he would let them take part in the Rosary. He sought them out with his glance, inviting them to pray. A decade of the Rosary at the microphone. Sometimes it happened that when there were more than 10 of them, in order to avoid any arguing, he combined more than one child for each Hail Mary, and their voices formed a little choir. He was an Italian-American who had lost everything, including his wife and son who were living in the United States. He came to know God precisely on his bench, on a day when it was cold and he was looking for a blanket. A kind woman from a relief center came by and gave him one. To give thanks, Walter decided to go to Mass that morning. He hadn't stepped into a church for over 30 years. In fact, in the United States, he had almost decided to become Jewish. Father Gobbi was celebrating the Mass. He comforted him and promised that he would find him a job. He later received a 3-year contract as a foreman in Iran. When he came back to Italy, he looked for Father Stefano again. Francisco Ch10 tells us what happened. Quote, "At the end of the Cenacle in San Nazare, Walter tried to speak to Father Gobbi, who was surrounded by a crowd of people. I remember the moment Father Stefano was standing there, and the whole crowd of people wanted to talk to him. One wanted a blessing, another wanted to show him a photo, and another was asking prayers for a loved one. My friend couldn't get close to him. It was Father Stefano who then went up to him and said, 'Walter, don't worry. First take care of yourself, then Our Lady will grant you the grace and you will find another job.' Once more, everything went as Father Stefano had predicted. After an operation, Walter found another job, and he also found Our Lady. Father Gobbi had been sent for this very reason. Quote, 'Take my most needy children in your priestly arms, support the weak, lead the hesitant, convert the sinners, heal the sick, comfort the despairing, bring those far away into the house of the Father, give to all the balm of my motherly and merciful love.'" A message of November 23, 1994. Walter returned to the Catholic Church and consecrated himself to Our Lady. He dedicated himself to the Church and started taking part in the cenacles. He fought for the homeless. He courageously faced the last years of his life, which were characterized by several hospitalizations, falls, and sufferings. He used to say, "The Lord wanted me to end up on a bench because otherwise I would have gotten lost, but instead I have found myself." Father Stefano himself was amazed at the spiritual journey that Our Lady allowed this homeless person to make. He had found the true life. Next is Teresa. When Father Stefano heard about Teresa Musco, who lived 1943 to 1976, and her extraordinary gifts, he wanted to meet her. As we have said before, this desire to meet people who were somewhat special or considered to be close to God didn't arise from mere curiosity. Rather, it was for him almost a necessity. Before Father Stefano felt that it was his duty to ask them to see his own personal calling was authentic and pleasing to God. He was looking for confirmation that it was true, and for this reason he was gently reprimanded by the Virgin herself. And yet, especially during the first years of the movement, he could not resist these urges. When he arrived, Teresa Musco didn't treat him very well. Quote, "Who is this priest who dresses like this? Our Lady doesn't want this." End quote. She was referring to his clergyman's suit with suit coat and trousers. In the beginning, Father Stefano dressed in this way. Later, he wore only the cassock until the end of his life. During the days of his first visit to Teresa Musco, who lived in the city of Caserta, in southern Italian region of Campania, Father Stefano often showed up at her door without being invited. This bothered the young woman, who didn't want any publicity, nor did she like being surrounded by curious people. She told him that he had to trust the Virgin Mary more, and that he shouldn't look for other signs for confirmation. Then she became more cooperative, because she understood that this priest from Milan who had come to be helped and to ask for her prayers. The detailed report kept by Father Franco Amico, Teresa Musco's spiritual director and afterwards a member of the MMP, showed that Father Stefano participated in a witness in some of Teresa Musco's mystical manifestations. He wrote on February 27, 1975, quote, "The phenomenon of the shedding of blood from the eyes of the face of Jesus. The witnesses were Father Stefano, etc." End quote. Then again on May 7, 1975, he wrote, "At around 9:30 p.m., the tears appeared again. Besides me, Franco Amico, Father Stefano Gobbi was also present." End quote. During another visit to Caserta, Father Stefano got into trouble. He took a small image which had shed blood and brought it to the bishop of the diocese so he could see it. Teresa didn't get upset since she had nothing to hide, but certainly Father Stefano had to learn to be more careful and not take such sensitive initiatives onto himself. In any case, in the end, Teresa Musco grew so fond of the impulsive priest whom she had treated so briskly at the first that she gave him a statue of the child Jesus, which Father Stefano never parted with until his death. The first thing he would do when he prepared for a trip was to put in his suitcase this statue of the child Jesus, which Teresa Musco had given him, and it became his companion all over the world. Next is Martha. In one of his cynicles in France, Father Stefano received the blessed grace of meeting Martha Robin. He was leading a meditation on the message of Fatima for some priest of the movement. He urged them to pray and penance as Our Lady had asked. He denounced the crisis of the church, the difficulties it was going through, and the rampant dogmatic and theological deviations which were creating confusion and crisis. At the end of the day, a priest came up to him and said, "What are you saying? What you are saying is the same thing I've been hearing from a certain holy soul of God for a long time." End quote. The priest turned out to be Father Georges Finet, the spiritual director of Martha Robin. Father Stefano took the opportunity and asked if he could meet her, and the request was granted. He went with Father Finet to Martha's house, where he got to meet her. In her little room, immersed in semi-darkness, Father Stefano spoke to her in broken French, telling her about the movement and asking her for advice. Martha told him, "What you are saying about Mother of God at Fatima has already been said by her in La Salette." End quote. We don't have any first-hand sources that can tell us anything else about the meeting, but surely he was very encouraged by it. Not only did he get to know Martha Robin, but he somehow received an assurance that his Marian mission was not a mistake. Among Father Stefano's private papers was a handwritten note which he kept inside a book about Martha Robin. It cites a statement made by Father Finet. Quote, "Martha explained to me that with the Foyer di Cariti, an organization she founded, there would be new things in the church. She spoke of consecrated lay people, large families guided by a priest and by the Mother of God, spiritual retreats lived as witness of unity and prayer. She told me that all this would happen after an intervention of the Holy Virgin Mary." End quote. What do all these words mean? Father Stefano probably observed some similarities between the movement and Martha Robin's Foyer di Cariti and wanted to take note from them. Next is John Paul II. Quote, "This evening, my son, I want to tell you of the tenderness which my motherly heart feels for the vicar of my son, the Pope." Message of October 30th, 1973. In the Blue Book, Our Lady speaks very often about the Pope and of the love, veneration, and obedience which he deserves. The movement was born, therefore, to support the Pope in times of grave internal conflict. After the encyclical Humanae Vitae in 1968, many bishops and even entire episcopates expressed more or less covertly criticism with regard to Pope St. Paul VI. As a result, the entire church was enveloped in an atmosphere of protest toward the Vatican, which came to be seen more as a place of authority and privilege rather than of service. Father Stefano was a son of the church, and he loved the Pope. It didn't matter who he was. At the beginning of every year, he used to send him his travel plans, and at the end of the year, he sent him a report of his activities, keeping him constantly informed of everything he had done, enclosing also copies of the circular letters he sent to the movement. He never failed to meditate on the Holy Father's talks. He constantly kept himself informed of all the papal documents that were published, and he encouraged his priests to keep up with this type of information too. When he was abroad and couldn't find the latest publications, he would phone one of his assistants and ask him to get the relevant documents for him. He made a point of making known to people the various catecheses and homilies of the Pope. He quoted and made reference to them, and was always asking everyone to be close to the Holy Father with their prayer and sacrifices. This was a need that Our Lady had placed in Father Stefano's heart. Here is a particular detail from 1978. In this year, the spiritual exercises of the movement were held in Rome, the only year in which they took place in the Eternal City. On July 3rd, 1978, a few weeks before the death of Pope St. Paul VI, the Virgin gave him this locution. You are also here in the city where the vicar of Jesus, the first of my beloved sons, the Pope lives, suffers, and is offering himself in sacrifice. I wanted you near him to help him now in the final and most painful stage of his journey. In you and through you, I myself am present, beneath the cross on which the Holy Father is living out the hours of his agony. It is for this reason that the Immaculate Heart of your Heavenly Mother in the Cenacle has always directed you, through prayer and love, toward his white-clad person." End quote. Naturally, he had a different relationship with each pope, since the popes were all different, but his veneration was the same. He was granted the grace to celebrate Holy Mass in the Vatican with Pope John Paul II a good number of times, and he was also received by him personally several times. Among the popes of his time, it cannot be denied that the most heartfelt and profound relationship was the one he had with Saint John Paul II. He was the Pope of Totus Tuus. On October 17, 1978, at the Pope's election, Father Stefano received this message. Quote, "Today you have prayed for the new Pope, whom my Immaculate Heart has obtained from Jesus for the good of his church. He is a son especially loved by me because he has consecrated himself to my heart from the beginning of his priesthood." End quote. The Polish Pope had pointed out that Father Stefano had to contact him directly by contacting his secretary, Monsignor Stanislaw, on his behalf. And if the Holy Father in turn needed to talk to Father Stefano, he would ask his secretary to contact him. Now, one of Father Gobbi's assistants recounts, "I was in the car with Father Stefano while he was driving. He received a phone call from Father Stanislaw, who told him that the Holy Father needed to speak to him. So when we reached our destination, Father Stefano immediately got in contact with the Pope." End quote. One day, John Paul II said to him, pointing his finger at him, "Your parish is the whole world." End quote. In all the cenacles that Father Stefano conducted in the various parts of the world, he never failed to unite himself with the Pope, to his needs and intentions. He himself confirmed it in his circular letter of October 16, 2003, quoting, "We too are celebrating with the Holy Father on the 25th anniversary of his pontificate. In all the cenacles I have made in every part of the world, we always feel united in a special prayer with our most beloved Holy Father. We share his joys, and we also take part in his great suffering. Today, St. John Paul II is the patron saint of the MMP. With Pope Benedict XVI, Father Stefano also had a good relationship based on faithfulness and filial devotion. He carefully sent him his schedules, reports, and circular letters. Sometimes he asked his assistants to write to the Pope. For example, Otávio Paiva of Brazil wrote in 2009, quote, "Holy Father, we have read the letter that Your Holiness has written to the bishops of the Catholic Church. We have been traveling to the United States and to many Latin American countries since January 15th. In all these cenacles, we have prayed for Your Holiness with enthusiasm and great love, entrusting our guardian angels with the task of bringing our prayers to You." End quote. The words Father Stefano used to address Pope Benedict shows the same affection without any preference for the previous pope. On December 19, 2005, he wrote to him, quote, "Pope Benedict, my sweet Christ on earth, how I would like to pour soothing balm on every one of your wounds, share with you the joy of the heart of Jesus, which acknowledge you as his courageous and faithful vicar. Make you feel the caress of our Heavenly Mother, which keeps you in the garden of her Immaculate Heart and carries you in her arms to accomplish the great and painful mission entrusted to you." End quote. Of course, the Pope read Father Stefano's letter. Cardinal Diaz would bring them to him personally, but unlike his predecessor, he didn't reply to them. Quote, "Perhaps you are surprised that I keep writing you," end quote. He wrote in a letter sent to the Pope on December 19, 2009. quoting, even though you haven't answered me, I do so because I am strongly urged by the Spirit, since this is a personal gift which the Immaculate Heart of Mary wants to offer to the Vicar of Jesus, in order to place a soothing balm on the numerous wounds of his heart, end quote. We mustn't think that Benedict XVI didn't mean well. On several occasions he had pointed out that priests shouldn't ask for special meetings with him because of his age, because of his workload, and because of the priorities he had given to the serious problems he had to deal with every day. Sister Paolina Sierra. Father Stefano not only had friends with whom he had moments of rest and relaxation, he also had some mothers who helped him and with whom he used to exchange views and ask for advice, prayers, and spiritual assistance. One of these women was without a doubt Sister Paolina Sierra, a religious of the Little Daughters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in Alessandria, Piedmont, Italy. Father Stefano went to visit this family of religious for the first time in 1991. Although they had invited him to come along before, the superior of the convent remembers that day, quoting, "He finally came after we had written to him several times, and he helped us to grow in our love for the Immaculate Heart of Mary," end quote. From that moment on, Father Stefano, when he could, would always go to stay a few days with them, even until a month before his death. The superior of the convent was Sister Paolina, a woman with an intense prayer life. She was humble and had the special ability to console, comfort, and give advice to those who came to her. The same was true for Father Stefano, who in some way chose her as his spiritual mother. He used to go to her to confide his moments of joy and sorrow, and she would help him. The priest trusted her because she had an interior life of intense prayer. Quoting, "We were dealing with a very difficult situation," narrates Father Cortillo Gabrielli, quote, "with someone who was trying to hurt Father Stefano, but he didn't want to believe it because this person was very dear to him. So we asked Sister Paolina for help, explaining the facts to her. When she spoke with Father Stefano about it, he opened his eyes and finally accepted it. Sister Paolina was gentle and willing, but could also be firm. The entire convent of nuns in Alessandria welcomed Father Stefano joyfully. He had become one of the family. The nuns used to take care of him, mend his clothes, and support him. In exchange, he used to bring them any gifts he could find, solemnly celebrating the liturgy with them, and dedicating himself to the nuns with catechesis and moments of prayer. Today, they recall, quoting, "We inhaled so much incense during his celebrations. In his liturgies, he was meticulous, and we were in trouble if everything wasn't perfect. He always wanted the cope for Eucharistic adoration." Father Stefano and Sister Paolina were very close. They were two strong souls who knew how important their relationship was. He spent his convalescence with them after his heart operation in 1997. When Father Stefano came to Alessandria with his suitcase, he would take out Teresa Musco's statue of the child Jesus and the statue of Our Lady. These two things were always in his suitcase, and then would put them in a place for everyone to see. The nuns were delighted even to the point that once another priest commented sarcastically that they were becoming the congregation of the Marian movement of priests. But then one of them replied resolutely that they were the sisters of the Sacred Heart because they were an imitation of Mary. Father Stefano and Sister Paolina had an intense spiritual relationship which was based on the Lord. Just imagine the following extraordinary coincidence, if we can call it that, one which with the eyes of faith we can perceive to be a union of love and suffering. It often happened that when Father Stefano found himself in difficult and sometimes dangerous trips abroad, Sister Paolina would become seriously ill. It was in this way that by becoming one, like Christ on the cross, that they were made truly responsible for each other, supporting, helping, and sharing in each other's sufferings. Father Stefano once confided to one of his friends, "When I am no longer around, if you need a really serious opinion, go to Sister Paolina." Sister Paolina, however, died a few months before Father Stefano in the same year, 2011, as though she wanted to precede him. Next chapter is A Crazy Heart Condition. In 1986, Father Stefano's excessive trips and fatigue caused his heart condition to worsen. The doctors told him that he definitely could not continue at that point. That year, he wrote in his circular letter, "After the spiritual exercises in San Marino, I wasn't feeling well. My doctor diagnosed me with a severe hypertension. I then underwent a long series of medical examinations, which revealed that I had a small heart attack without realizing it. My doctor had forbidden me to go on my trip to South America, which was supposed to begin on August 25th. It was very painful for me not to be able to leave on this trip, since they had already prepared the itinerary, and in some countries, such as Nicaragua, I had been officially invited on behalf of the Episcopal Conference. I offered this suffering to the Immaculate Heart of Mary in the certainty that she herself would take care of things and make up for it." After a year of rest, everything went back to normal, and he was better. However, who could stop someone like Father Gobbi? Yet, he now had a heart condition. He suffered from chest pains, but he didn't say anything about it to others because he didn't want to worry them, and also because they would have stopped him immediately. However, he wanted to die on the battlefield, and in order to have the strength to face all the strain of the cynicals, the crowds, and his continuous traveling, he would swallow up the 20 pills of trinitrotoluenes a day, a dose which is certainly not recommended. In 1995, he had a removal of his gallbladder, operation after being suddenly hospitalized in Moristica near Venice, and in the summer of 1997, his heart simply couldn't take it anymore, and he had a heart attack. Father Stefano had been on the move in an incredible way for many years, so much that when his heart attack finally came, everyone thought he might not make it. He was hospitalized in Gravedona, near Como, where he was in intensive care for several days. He then underwent triple bypass surgery. Later, he commented, "Our Lady has been working her miracles on me for 2 years," which meant that he had already been feeling ill for at least 2 years, and that he had continued pushing himself just the same. In September, before the operation, he wrote to his friend, Monsignor Stanislaw, secretary to Pope John Paul II, "I am writing you this letter as if you were my brother. On August 16th, I had a myocardial infarction. The results of this examination revealed that my coronaries were in very bad condition. For this reason, it is a miracle that I was able to make the strenuous trips of these last few years. And so on October 9th and 10th, I will be hospitalized to have bypass surgery. I was very disappointed that I had to cancel the trips for the cynicals which I had planned with so much care. Nevertheless, in my great suffering, I have come to understand what has happened to me. It has been a gentle intervention of our Heavenly Mother. In fact, over the last few years, I was taking trips and doing cynicals, although I was suffering a lot. The same also happened this year in San Marino. In spite of everything, I would have continued my strenuous apostolate and would have been very willing to have given my own life for the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of our Heavenly Mother. However, she stopped me so that I could take care of myself. I must say that in this suffering, I have experienced her motherly presence in a strong way. I have offered all my sufferings in order to support the painful journey which our most beloved Pope John Paul II is making. In this way, I am always close to him. I would like you to bring to the Pope this suffering of mine, to which our Mother is calling me, and I offer it for him. I am very grateful for the prayers for my healing, which have come from all over the world. On September 18, 1997, he sent a special letter to the members of the Marian movement of priests entitled Father Stefano Writes, where he kept everyone updated on his illness. He also added that his suffering was offered up, quote, so that Our Lady would make extraordinary graces descend from her Immaculate Heart for the sanctification and the spiritual transformation of all the MMP members, end quote. In the following years, he fell ill on several occasions. At times, he was forced to postpone some of his engagements, but basically he led his usual life. He felt that he couldn't possibly stop or slow down. His last trip to Africa in 2008 took place in such hot weather and under such stress that it would have exhausted even a young person. Yet Father Stefano carried on well, apparently, without any problems. When he was forced to take a rest, he used to meditate on the theme of pain and on the effectiveness of the apostolate of suffering. In his last circular letter of January 1st, 2011, Father Stefano wrote, "The moment of suffering is precious and must be welcomed by each one of us with meekness and trust because it assimilates us to Jesus, priest and victim. It makes us collaborators in his work of salvation, and so it becomes very fruitful in these times of purification. But we must not wait for great and extraordinary sufferings. The Blessed Mother asks us for small and hidden sufferings, those that come to us from carrying well the cross of one's own ministry and of living every moment of the day in the spirit of immolation." End quote. In her message of September 15th, 1975, Our Lady said, "Nothing contributes so much to the triumph of my Immaculate Heart as a priestly heart which suffers." It was so coincidence that Father Stefano had chosen for inspiration a saintly figure he had recently discovered, Blessed Mary of Jesus Crucified, who lived 1846 to 1878, known as the Little Arab. She was a Carmelite mystic who experienced great suffering and accepted it with great love. During his time of suffering, Father Stefano always carried her biography with him. She used to sign her name as the Little Nothing. Father Stefano would talk about this and use her as an example. She taught him how to live his suffering with dignity and love. St. Vincent Ferrer wrote, "Jesus Christ will never grant his grace, without which we can do nothing, to anyone who, having at his disposal a person capable of instructing and directing him, ignores the efficacious means of sanctification, thinking that he is self-sufficient and that, by himself, he can seek and find what is necessary for his salvation." It was obvious that someone like Father Stefano Gobbi, who experienced the phenomenon of the locutions, which involved thousands of people, had to have a spiritual director with whom he could continuously seek counsel. It isn't necessary to insist on the importance of spiritual guidance. Pope Pius XI affirmed, he was the Pope of Father Stefano's first Christian formation, stating, "In setting out upon this spiritual life, do not depend too much on yourselves, but rather with simplicity and docility seek counsel and ask help from those who can guide you wisely. A good spiritual director can warn you in advance against the dangers that you may encounter both interiorly and exteriorly, and can suggest suitable remedies and wisely guide you to a greater way of perfection, having as an example the saints in heaven and the great teachers of Christian asceticism. Without these prudent directors of conscience, it is generally difficult to respond as one should to the supernatural promptings of the Holy Spirit and of a divine grace." End quote. From the beginning of the movement, Father Renzo Del Fonte was Father Gobbi's spiritual director. In the first edition of the Blue Book, Father Renzo wrote, "Finding out about this movement was a real gift from the Lord. My becoming a member of it was one of the best decisions I have ever made. In fact, I didn't want to get involved in a new association of priests, which might take away from the commendable ones which already existed and waste the energy of those who have already made their good commitments." End quote. In the 7th edition, he adds, Then Providence placed into my hands, one after another, some notes that Father Stefano had handwritten in his little notebooks of locutions. When I take time to reread these little notebooks, I always find them more simple and profound. Father Stefano was accompanied by Father Renzo on his first trips to the movement in Italy. When you travel together, it's easier to share things, find comfort and support, and to enjoy one's friendships too. Father Renzo was held in high esteem by all. One of the priests who took part in the spiritual exercises in Fatima in 1979 said this about him: "Many meditations were led by Father Renzo. Everyone appreciated them almost more than those of Father Stefano. He was a man of culture and had an uncommon spiritual depth. He spoke with clarity and was convincing. However, the relationship of spiritual fatherhood, which started off well, later on came to an unhappy ending with a sudden and painful interruption. It happened around 1985. Father Renzo had met some people who said they had visions, and he started to spend time with them. And the more he listened to them, the more a certain mistrust grew with regard to Father Stefano's locutions. At a certain point in their relationship became so strained that Father Renzo resigned as his spiritual director. This caused great pain to Father Stefano. He had always received from Our Lady clear instructions about being docile and obedient, quoting, "Be ever more docile and obedient to your spiritual director. Entrust yourself to him completely. I will give him the necessary light to understand what I want of him for the realization of my plans." That was a message of June 7th, 1975. And from this place I bless you all with an abundance of graces, including your spiritual director, whom I have placed at your side, and whom I am making an increasingly docile instrument in my hands for the realization of my plans, and including also these little children of mine who are keeping you company. That was a message of July 24th, 1975. Father Renzo del Fonte had believed so firmly in the movement that he wrote the introductory note for the Blue Book in 1976, quote, "Let us pray that by means of this army which Our Lady is preparing, the light may shine again in the midst of the great darkness, and the world may prepare for the purification which awaits it." But then he himself withdrew from the army, at least as far as the movement was concerned, and he abandoned it for good in the mid-1980s. The Virgin revealed to Father Stefano that he would never see him again. Thereafter, Father Renzo's life was troubled. He got involved in the company of dubious characters to the point that he was asked to leave the archdiocese. He then went to live in France for a while. Later, he returned to Italy and lived in Metanopoli, in the area of Milan, as a chaplain in a nursing home. He died in 2013. Before he died, Father Stefano wanted to hear from his old spiritual director once more at all costs. The two had a comforting phone call, as Father Cortillo Gabriel recounts. All Father Stefano did was ask me to find Father Renzo's phone number, so I looked it up. One day, when for the umpteenth time he told me he wanted to talk to him, I managed to put them in contact by phone. I don't know what they said to each other, but Father Stefano was happy. At the end of the phone call, he revealed to me that he had received one of the greatest joys in his life. End quote. As the Virgin had foretold, the two never saw each other again, but they did speak to each other. They became reconciled and were able to say their goodbyes. Another important fact is that Father Renzo was never forgotten by the Virgin Mary. She told Father Stefano that one of the priests of the movement had offered his life and sufferings to help and save this son of hers. Father Renzo wasn't the only spiritual director in Father Stefano's life. For 4 or 5 years, he was assisted and supported by Father Paolino Potalivo, a Franciscan friar from Abruzzo. He was also a member of the movement, but had to give up his role as Father Gobbi's spiritual director because he had too many commitments, even though he always remained an active priest in the MMP. After Father Paolino, and until around 2000, the priest to whom Father Stefano entrusted his spiritual life was Father Franco Reina, a Barnabite priest from Milan. But paradoxically, the same thing happened with him. Due to various commitments, but also because of their differing points of view, he left his role as Father Stefano's spiritual director, even though they maintained good fraternal relations. In the last 10 years of his life, Father Stefano no longer had a real spiritual director, even though he certainly never lacked the support of many priests who esteemed and helped him with their advice. The ones who were particularly dear to him were Father Luigi Consorti and Father Cortalo Gabrielli, who was one of his first assistants and a very loyal friend. And then there was Father Dino Lorenzotti, a Franciscan priest whom he met when the latter was still a student in 1974. Father Gobbi wrote about him in a letter to a friend. From the beginning, he has always been close to me in every circumstance, and we have enjoyed a profound and providential bond. Father Dino had received permission from his superiors to follow the movement and to be with Father Stefano for a few days each week, to help him take care of everyday situations, organize trips, etc. Father Dino came up with the idea of calculating the number of trips Father Stefano had taken, so he recorded in a precious notebook all of Father Gobbi's travels, both in Italy and abroad. Over the years, however, Father Dino felt that the Lord was calling him to something different. He founded a group called Les Rondinelles, the Little Swallows. At the beginning, he didn't say anything, perhaps out of respect, or perhaps because he didn't know how to tell Father Stefano, who was very close to him. Until in the year 2000, they had a meeting to clarify things, and Father Stefano decided to let the young Francisco follow his own path. Therefore, their paths separated. This was a painful separation for Father Stefano, but he accepted it sincerely and with faith.